And we're back. We're going to start debate shortly.
A little bit about debate before we begin. Debate is regulated time discussion of a proposition. 2 teams of 3 students each prepare for their argument, collecting quotes and other evidence from their own sources to defend their ideas. Proposition or opposition on a given proposition. They prepare for 1 hour using only a dictionary and an almanac. The proposition is determined by the IASAS committee. Good luck.
Please join me in welcoming the timing officials to begin the debate. Thank you.
Welcome to the final round of debate. Today our debaters will argue the following proposition. This House believes that secluded religious communities should require that their members to spend time in broader society. Once the debate has begun, no one is allowed to enter or leave the room. Please turn off any phones, beepers, pagers, and watch alarms now. Do not applaud until the debate is completely finished. It will take about 1 hour. If you cannot stay for the whole debate, please leave now before we begin. At the end of the debate, judges will go to deliberate and will offer an oral critique in room C11 10 to 15 minutes after the debate has concluded. Thank you.
Imagine an individual who has lived their whole life in a room. Now, don't mistake this room for a prison cell. It has its comfortable and it has what's necessary for life. But ladies and gentlemen, the ultimate truth is that this is a room. The person might be happy in their room, but at the end of the day, they don't know what's outside that room, and they might still be filled with some small curiosity, some small dream of what lies outside those walls. We are talking about this person today. The problem of this motion is that currently, with secluded religious communities, there are inherent flaws that need to be changed, and this motion is a call to action. That those problems that we see right now in secluded religious communities are exactly what we seek to remedy by requiring them to spend time with broader society. So what are the problems that we see with secluded religious communities today? Well, ladies and gentlemen, there are 2 key problems. The first problem is that there are limited opportunities available for those who are living in these religious communities. And the second integral problem is that there are tensions between both society and that religious community and within these communities themselves. So how do we remedy these problems? Well, it is therefore the burden of the proposition to actually prove that by mandating this motion, we're giving more opportunities to and diluting tensions faced by these religious communities. And we will do so by proving that there are actual benefits both to the individuals, to the whole communities, and to broader society. So before I go into our case, I would like to start by defining the motion. We define secluded as removed from others or solitary, and religious communities as a group of individuals whose lives are centered around a common faith. Now, to contextualize these secluded religious communities, we believe that as a whole, these communities must share a separate set of facilities and follow their own form of tenets of government, so some own governing body that governs that individual community. And so if we look at examples of such communities, we can look at the communities of Lisu Christians and the Amish people. We define require as expected to, and broader society as mainstream culture. Now our policy, ladies and gentlemen, how exactly we're going to implement this motion and how exactly these religious communities will require their members to spend time in broader society is that these individuals will, upon turning 18, undergo a 1-year internship, 1-year community service, or part or whole of their college education. And so essentially, they're not forced to spend a long period of time. They must spend at least a year, depending on how they pursue their educational ventures. And it's only to ensure that they have some kind of exposure to the real world. And moving on to our contentions. We have 4 contentions today. The first is that by requiring these members, these communities to spend, by requiring these communities, these members of these communities to spend time in broader society, we are ensuring the individuals of these communities' choice. We are strengthening these existing communities and the future communities that will arise up from these. And we are reducing social stigma in broader society and introducing elements of broader society to these communities. Now, before I begin my first contention, I'd like to stress that in all 4 of these contentions, hold on one second, in all 4 of these contentions, the proposition will prove exactly what benefits that more time in broader society will present to both the individual, the community, and broader society. Yes, ma'am.
If the proposition's focus is also on making broader society learn from these cultures, would it not be more efficient for broader society to make members of that society spend time in the secluded community?
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, there are benefits that can be earned from broader society spending time with these village communities. But there's two reasons why the proposition feels that it's better to actually implement the reverse. The first is that there are key benefits that are posed when these members actually spend time in broader society that these individuals themselves experience, but they wouldn't experience if broader society came to them. And second of all, in many instances, it can be perceived as intrusive if broader society is coming into these communities. And therefore, the proposition believes that in some senses, it's more detrimental to these communities for external members to come in than it is for these members to spend a year or so outside exploring their whatever they intend to choose. And so our first contention is about ensuring individual choice. Now we all know that choice is a virtue, is a right that has been championed by people for centuries. We value it in so many rights that are dependent actually on choice. Freedom of speech, for example, the choice to say what you want to say, is something that has been contested and debated and preserved by humans for so long. And we believe, and ladies and gentlemen, let's not mistake this for anything else. This is an extension of choice, it's an extension of free will. Because the individuals who grow up in these communities, the individuals who are born into these communities and this culture is bestowed upon them by their parents, they never have the choice to actually experience external society. They are forced into this community, and though it might suit their wishes, though it might suit their desires, they never actually make that choice. So by allowing them to spend a year of external society, they can see this broader society and, no thank you, and actually determine for themselves whether they want to stay or whether they want to go out to the real world. Sure, they might decide that in fact that lifestyle is suited for their taste, that in fact they care about that lifestyle, they believe that it's the right lifestyle for them, and in which case they will go out and return back into their communities. But in the chance that they don't feel like that is a community that's suited for them, they're allowed to leave. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the proposition wants to make a key distinction. We do not believe that village communities are by nature oppressive, and we do not believe that there is inherently some kind of brainwashing going on. But there is naturally, when an individual is born into a society, it is innate that that person will not actually know what is without that society, especially if it's one that is secluded. And therefore, the proposition believes it is important that these people get some kind of choice, regardless of whether or not they actually feel like they're satisfied with their lifestyle. They might have some, as children we all know, they might have some sort of curiosity of our society, but because of that fear of ostracization, they might never actually pursue it. And following our policy, these individuals will be able to see the outside world for whatever desired time period, make that decision, and come back with no fear of being socially ostracized or excommunicated from any facets of their community life. Now, we can look at to really understand why this is applicable, we can look at an analogy for school. We see in school that there are many courses that are mandated or required that we take. And we take these classes. Now, in some cases, we might not feel they're required for our education, and we might not feel like we like the subjects. But at the end, there are certain benefits of taking these classes when we actually look at our careers. So, for example, if we have a doctor, or someone who's very set on following the path of medicine, they might not feel like there's any benefit in taking an arts, taking a music. But if they take that class, they might feel that there's some interest there. They might see that they like that different facet of education. And in the same way, in this case, if there's a child or an individual who has never left their community and sees that they actually like what's outside the community better than what they've been experiencing in the community, they may feel like that's more suited to what they want. And so if we tie back to our yardstick and exactly show what the process is proving, here all these people get the opportunity to explore society outside their community, and therefore they're experiencing benefits and we are resolving the problem that is present in today's society as it is. So what about those who are actually tied to their communities, who actually decide that they like that community they were before and decide to go back to it? Well, then we now have another problem that's resolved. We have a newly tightened community because the new individuals that make up the future community will be those who are committed to that lifestyle. So, for example, if you look at the Amish people who have Rumspringa, those who return to the Amish community, who decide that Amish community is actually for them, have a commitment to that kind of lifestyle because they understand that is what they want. They will never have these doubts about their lifestyle. They'll never have these curiosities about external lifestyle because they know, they've seen that life outside of their own community, and they know that they understand that they made a sacrifice and that is the lifestyle they want to live. So it's actually better for the community because now you have a group of dedicated individuals as opposed to certain individuals being wary of their lifestyle or being curious about what's outside. This new generation that we see who will actually experience this policy will grow up, and they'll actually grow up to run the community with a newfound preservation of society that's due to this recommitment. My next speaker will talk about the social stigma that's countered and the new possibilities of tenets of government that can be brought back to these communities. Thank you.
As the first speaker for the opposition, I'm going to go ahead and present our contentions as well as clarify some of the definitions presented by the proposition as to why we believe that secluded religious communities should not require their members to spend time in broader society. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and say that we accept the definitions presented by the proposition, but would like to emphasize that some religious communities do take active steps to isolate themselves from broader society, and we believe that this must be considered in this debate. That being said, we'll go ahead and outline our contentions, our first of which being that this policy is a clear example of cultural imperialism and thus must not be implemented. Our second contention is that contact irreversibly changes a society and its people, and we believe that this is central to this debate. And our third contention is that broader exposure to society results in detrimental effects on the psychology and social structure of that system. There is no social or psychological stability in that issue. And that being said, I'm going to go ahead and address some of the proposition's contentions in relation to our own. The proposition's first speaker brought up these ideas of inherent flaws in these secluded religious communities. She said that these communities are cut off from opportunity, and she further emphasized that it is up to us as these debaters to find ways to fix the problems faced by religious communities today. And what we'd like to emphasize is that we are not in a position to determine what flaws these communities are in. It is impossible for us to say that there are problems, please just give me a second. It is impossible for us to say that what problems there are. It is impossible for us to say what we should fix in these communities because only they can properly understand what flaws they have and how to fix them. Any other assessment would be colored by our own culture, by our own understandings of society. Yes?
So would the opposition still be okay if these religious communities were actually being oppressive to their people by not allowing them even to lead?
We believe that that is beside the point here because most religious communities are not like this. While we do understand that there perhaps is some concern for this sort of thing from happening, the idea is that most religious communities should not do this, and we believe that this specific example really is an externality in this debate. Thank you. So let's remember that we are not in a position to do this, and this feeds right back into our first contention. Perhaps the most clear, that the danger of cultural imperialism is too high to be ignored. So it is implicitly assumed that we believe that our own culture, the culture experienced by most of us in this room today, is superior to that of the cultures of secluded religious communities. That is how we identify flaws. That is how we mandate fixes. That is how we can take it upon ourselves to enter into that culture and fix it for them. So most people, think of it this way, most people would not consider bringing themselves into a secluded religious community because they would believe that experience to be uncomfortable. Likewise, those in the community may not want to enter our own culture, and thus it is not for us to mandate that they should. It is not for us to say that, well, yes, we do believe that secluded religious communities should enter our own culture, because that is a very presumptuous statement that assumes that our culture please on that. So if given a choice, exposure to outside culture would result in bad changes for that thing. We are assuming that our culture is better. We are assuming that our culture, as it stands now, is superior to the culture of the secluded community. And also, let's remember that cultural preservation is a very important, necessary point to consider. We must consider that exposure to other cultures would quickly deteriorate or even erase the cultures experienced by those religious communities. Yes?
Is cultural preservation still important if it goes against the free will of the people?
The free will of the people is generally respected in these communities, and we believe that cultural preservation at the expense of free will is not acceptable. However, in the religious communities, this is not always the case. You are taking blanket statements, you are trying to apply these very basic ideas to the entirety of religious communities. Well, this simply is not true. We cannot expend to force our own values onto other societies to say that we are fixing a problem inherent with them, because again, this is a clear example of cultural imperialism. This must not be permitted. So in a very white man's burden sort of a society, in a very white man's burden sort of idea, we assume that we are going in there to educate the natives in these communities. We assume that we take it upon ourselves to civilize and expose and teach the communities of these people that what they are doing right now is wrong and that we have it better. So, to accomplish this end, we decide to bring in people from their society into ours to show them how great our society right now is. And this is clearly cultural imperialism. This clearly cannot be tolerated. And we believe that this example alone shows that why religious communities should not. Sorry, I'm running out of time. Please. With that, I'm going to move into our second contention that contact irreversibly changes a society and its people. And this goes into one of the proposition's points, that there is a choice. However, we would contend that there is no choice, because as soon as contact is made, that choice disappears. As soon as contact is made, these secluded religious communities reach a point where their society changes forever. And we believe that is central to this debate. So let's take it from the perspective of those who choose to stay in these communities, who have gone, as they said, at the age of 18 for maybe a year, maybe two, and come back to the communities and decided that they like it better. Now, the clear fact of the matter is that as soon as that contact has been made, as soon as foreign cultures have been exposed to these religious communities, the life of those religious communities has also changed considerably. That being said, the culture prior to exposure, give me a second please, the culture prior to exposure is not the same as the culture post-exposure. It has been permanently and irreversibly changed. Yes?
Then is the opposition implying that if their religious communities do require this, then those people in the religious communities would like that change in broader society?
Could you
and
please
that's why
repeat your point in a more concise manner?
Apologies. Is the opposition implying that if we were to pass this motion, the people in those religious communities would like broader society and that's why it would be changed?
No, we believe that the reason that there is a change in the society is simply because of the exposure. As soon as you expose people to new ideas, to new concepts, of course they will take this in consideration in their own lives. Whether they like it or not, the idea is, and whether or not they like it or not, the ideas presented by outside society would enter our own. So in this regard, we believe that no matter whether or not it is a conscious choice on the part of the religious community, the change will happen and the change is irreversible. So expanding to, let's for instance look at an example in perhaps a well-known TV series, Star Trek. Now, Star Trek has a concept known as the Prime Directive, and this is the idea that Starfleet is based upon. And the Prime Directive simply states that the Starfleet organization will never expose itself to a new culture for fear of influencing it in a manner that is outside the realm of Star Trek to do. So to expand this to our world, we cannot interfere or contact a secluded community simply because our simple presence will affect that community in profound ways that are nearly impossible to anticipate. The idea that we enter into their community is a clear sign, again, of cultural imperialism, and also clearly shows that our simple presence there changes that society forever. We remove the choice from that system simply because when we go in there, the choice is no longer between the community as it was before or broader society as we prescribe it, but rather between the community as it is after contact and the society as we choose it. So really that choice is taken away from them. To quickly conclude, we believe that cultural imperialism must be completely avoided to preserve the culture within that system. We believe that their cultures must be respected and that we are not in any position to tell them what their problems are, to tell them what their flaws are, and to tell them how they should fix it. That is not our place. It is rather for the secluded communities to do this themselves. It is for the secluded communities to reach these solutions themselves and to identify flaws themselves. We are not in a position to do this for them. We need to avoid a repeat of the question of white man's burden, that we should take it upon ourselves to fix these communities for them, and we believe that this must be key to this debate. White man's burden cannot be repeated. We have seen the harmful effects that it has had in the past. Imperialism by other nations must not ever be repeated again. So there's also no choice. As soon as we introduce our culture onto theirs, there's an irreversible change in the host nation's culture. As soon as we move into that society, whether or not they like it or not, whether or not they choose to accept it or not, there is a change. And that change itself is a reason why we must not carry out this motion. That being said, thank you very much, and we continue to vigorously oppose this motion.
Time.
Ladies and gentlemen, today the opposition has told you that there exists a minority of religious communities that choose to isolate their members and choose to not let their members get any exposure to broader society. And we agree with this. And does the audience today know that what this minority of religious communities are called? Well, these are called secluded religious communities. And this is the exact minority that we are trying to change the mindset of. So ladies and gentlemen, first let's characterize what exactly a secluded religious community is. Now, the opposition themselves said that a secluded religious community is one that takes active steps to isolate the community and takes active steps to allow a lack of transfer of ideas or concepts between modern-day society and the religious community itself. Now, they said that we should not look out for the best of these people inside the religious community because the secluded religious community itself will look out for the best of the people. But this is why we as the proposition believe that in a secluded religious community that does not allow the transfer of people in and out of its borders, there is a lack of choice. And this is the problem that we want to resolve with the proposition's policy that we're trying to enforce today. Yes, sir?
What standing do we have to tell other communities how they should change themselves?
The point that we're trying to make is that communities are ultimately composed of individuals. And the individual always has the ultimate right to choice. Be him living in Syria, be him living in a religious community, the individual always has the right to choice. Therefore, it is our duty, in fact, it's the religious community's duty itself to allow for all choice for all its individuals. And to allow for all choice, the individual must be able to make a conscious decision in rejecting the broader day society, no thank you sir, and in accepting his own religious community. And how would an individual make this conscious choice? Well, it is only if he has actually been exposed to broader day society, which is why we believe the proposition's policy enables this choice to be made, because they have the power of knowledge and they're able to consciously assimilate into their own religious community, and this is not enforced by the mindset of the religious community itself. Now, the opposition believes that it's important to maintain cultural preservation, and we as a proposition would never say anything against cultural preservation. But here's the thing. In a secluded religious community, this is done at the expense of the free will of the people. Because because the community itself does not allow, like I've said multiple times, for the transfer of the people inside and outside. So do we have culture for the sake of culture? Or do we have culture because we feel there are derived benefits for the people if we have culture? Now, the opposition hopes that the opposition does not want diversity for the sake of diversity, because cultural diversity should have a benefit to our society. And we're telling you that cultural preservation may have that benefit only if the people who partake in a religious ideology do so of their own free will. And in a secluded religious community, in the status quo, a secluded religious community that does not allow the transfer of their own people, these people are not assimilating into their own community based off their free will, because they've had no exposure, no thank you sir, to the broader day society. Therefore, we would not stand for the culture, we would not stand for culture for the sake of culture, but we would stand for individual choice of the people. And if these people choose to preserve their culture, and if these people choose because they have the knowledge of what they're forsaking by not going to broader day society, then that's the cultural preservation that we would stand for. Now the next thing, the opposition believes that there's a sort of cultural imperialism that's going on here, but frankly, this is not the case. If the opposition had listened to our policy carefully, they would have learned that we're not teaching or enforcing or trying to assimilate these people into their own broader day society, but we're trying to expose to them different elements from what they've been exposed to the rest of their life. Therefore, exposure does not directly link into the intentional assimilation and the intentional brainwashing of individuals. We want the individual to have the amount of information necessary to make the conscious choice to stay in his religious community, and to make and on the converse, to make the conscious choice to reject the broader day society. This is not assimilation, but this is enabling choice, and this is enabling the individual to make a rational decision. And also, as my proposition speaker said in her contention, this also enables a community where everyone who's part of that community has demonstrated commitment to the community and has demonstrated that they believe that the tenets of their religious community is what they prefer over anything else. No, thank you, sir. Actually, the opposition has conceded to one point made by the proposition, because they said as soon as contact is made between the people of the religious community and broader day society, there will be an irreversible change on the community, because these people will adopt certain principles, these people will adopt certain ideas. Now, what does this mean? If a person is adopting certain ideas and adopting certain principles, this means they favor certain principles and certain ideas. This means this person has made a conscious effort and has rejected his old ideas and has instead assimilated and subscribed to new ideas because he believes it's for the purpose of his own self-betterment. So is it wrong that change might be made in the community if all the people unanimously vote that it's for their own self-betterment? And this is what the proposition stands for today. Even if the same purity, even if the same tenets of the religious community do not stand as the same as it was before, that does not matter, because the people like what they're practicing in the religious community. And they like what they're practicing because they've consciously rejected the other tenets in the broader society, and they've consciously subscribed to their own tenets. And this is the point the proposition is standing for today. Now moving on to my two substantives that I, as a second opposition speaker, will elaborate on. Firstly, the question that religious communities spend some time in broader day society will reduce social stigma in the broader day society itself. That is, it's a benefit for the broader day society. And secondly, having individuals spend some time in broader day society introduces elements of broader day society that they can take and practice and enforce into their own religious community, which is benefit for the religious community itself. So I'll be talking about two benefits of this policy, one to the broader day society and one to the religious community itself. Now, how does this benefit the broader day society? Well, it reduces social stigma. Now, it's undeniable that religious communities and broader day societies, they coexist in one same region. But since the religious community is secluded, there's a lack of contact and there's a lack of transfer between the broader society and the individual community itself. So what does this mean? Well, this means that there exists a lack of misunderstanding and a lack of comprehension of each party by both sides. Of course, we can understand why this sort of misunderstanding may stem. Because the mainstream society has never been exposed to these individuals from this one distinct religious community, they've only been fed bias, maybe prejudice, coming from uninformed sources. So they don't know the true character of these people. And we would like to argue that the true character of these people are not as detrimental, as these individuals in broader society might make it out to be. They've never seen, worked, lived together, or lived alongside with these members of these individual communities. So it's only natural that some extent of social stigma would exist. And actually, in the Li Shu Chinese religious minority in China, this sort of social stigma does exist. The Han Chinese, the minorities of the Chinese in these the minority of Chinese in this country look very negatively down upon the Li Shu Christians because they never had exposure to these individuals. But we believe that if this exposure is made, if they're able to live and work alongside, even for a temporary period, this sort of social stigma, no thank you sir, your time's up actually, this type of social stigma would be minimized because there's a greater understanding between the two. So, broader society is in fact ameliorated because social stigma is eradicated and people live together more harmoniously. And finally, elements of modern-day society, including economic elements and more governmental elements, can be introduced into the religious community. The Amish people, because of the Rumspringa, they have chosen to adapt cars and farm equipment into their own community because they've been out of modern society. They've seen these beneficial practices implemented, and they've chosen to come back and assimilate into their own thing. So the religious communities do, in fact, are in fact on a process of self-betterment because individuals are able to adapt beneficial practices outside and come back and incorporate into their own society. Thank you very much.
As the second speaker for the opposition, I would like to rebut some of the arguments that have been put forth by the proposition, as well as reaffirm the second and the third contentions made by my own team. Now, first of all, I would like to go back all the way to the beginning, to the example, the analogy that they opened with, of a person who has lived their entire life in a room. However, I would like to contest that with the quote, "No man is an island." Let us look at it this way. No man is an island. Every person is a product of their upbringing, of their religion, of their education, and all of these factors are shaped by society. These people that we are discussing come from secluded religious communities, and that is the word that we should be focusing on, the community. They do not exist in isolation. They are not trapped in a room in which they are not exposed to outside influences. They are exposed to influences in the form of people within their own community, and so we feel that that analogy does not apply to the situation. Now, the second thing that I would like to bring up is the proposition's very admirable emphasis on individual choice and the right to choose and free will. They also state that they are operating under the very benevolent assumption that most secluded religious communities are not actively oppressing their people. However, we would like to point out that the resolution, which I will read out in full, states that the House believes that secluded religious communities should not require their members to spend time in broader society. Even if it is the religious community themselves that is making the decision to require their members to spend time in broader society, either way, freedom of choice is still being violated. The opposition is not against cultural exposure. The opposition firmly believes that yes, great things can come of learning of other people. Discrimination can be abated. New ideas can be absorbed. However, we believe that each person has the right to choose for themselves whether or not they wish to be exposed. They should not, as the proposition believes, be forced to make this choice. Thank you. Yes, okay.
But does the opposition not realize that in some cases, because of fear of social ostracization, which in many cases happens in these communities, people will not try to venture out, at least see what's out there, even though they might have some kind of innate curiosity?
Well, we believe that that is done up to the person, and it is not our part to force their secluded religious community to change their own rules in order to benefit these people. They must be the change that they want to see, to borrow a phrase from a very well-known politician. Now, secondly, and this is why we believe that most of the arguments that the proposition have brought up are in fact irrelevant. Now, secondly, they also make some disturbing claims that people in these secluded communities, these new generations that have learned from the outside world and come back, these will be the new leaders of the community. And they will change, and they have stated that their goal with this, with the passing of this motion would be to change the mindset of these secluded religious communities. We feel that in this, there is a dangerous amount of implicit cultural imperialism, the belief that our culture is better than theirs. Perhaps we are not stating it explicitly, but the fact that we believe that exposing these people to our culture is automatically the best thing to do, the most beneficial thing for them to do, smacks of the wrong belief that we are better than they are. Societies exist independently of themselves. They can interact, but we cannot force our judgments of a culture on themselves. We cannot force our moral beliefs, and our moral systems on other people. That would be tantamount to cultural imperialism, and that would result in, as my first colleague has stated, the loss of culture and the destruction of these secluded religious communities' psychological and social stability. Now, I shall go on and reaffirm the contentions of my team. First of all, that contact irreversibly changes a society and its people. My first colleague has already made mention of Star Trek's Prime Directive, but I would like to take a slightly different route that perhaps achieves the same ends. In science, there is a fundamental principle that the act of observation changes the measurements that are being taken, that the act of observing changes what is being observed. In psychology, this manifests as the Hawthorne effect, that the observer changes the participant's behavior. But just by the participants being aware of the observer, their behavior is thus changed. And we believe that this same principle applies in anthropology, applies in the study of cultures. When we believe that no matter who initiates the contact, the fact that there is contact in the first place irreversibly changes the societies at hand. I would like to, and then this leads to the possibility of two things. Firstly, it could lead to what will be addressed in our third contention, the breakdown of psychological and social stability in the target community. And secondly, it could lead to the loss of culture. No, thank you. Secondly, it could lead to the loss of culture. I would like to cite an example of an Amazonian tribe, a secluded religious community in the Amazon, which interacted, they reached out and they interacted with anthropologists who were in the area. And while the anthropologists expressed admiration for these cultures' unique way of building their houses, their unique style of dress, these cultures decided to abandon their unique style of housing, their unique style of dress, and took up the way of housing and the style of dress of broader society. While we may say that yes, I believe that I know where your point of information has come from. While we may say that yes, this is their own choice, this is their own manifestation of free will, which may I remind you the proposition has contradicted themselves on, well, this is a manifestation of their own free will. The net effect of this, objectively, is still a loss of culture. We are saying power to them if they decide to do this, but ultimately we feel that the world does not benefit from things like this.
Yes. But why is the opposition so concerned with maintaining as many cultures as possible? Can the opposition please tell us why culture and many cultures are so important?
We believe that it is not perhaps our place to justify why protection of cultural diversity should be the focus that it already is. We feel that most people do understand that it is important to maintain the diversity that is inherent within our world, and that any loss of this is a fundamental tragedy. It is a tragedy to the generations that will come, that they are not living in a world that is as diverse as it has once been. Now we would, and then they state that the benefits to broader society might outweigh these small losses, but we ask, is it truly worth it for broader society to perhaps eliminate a little bit of discrimination, no, thank you, to perhaps eliminate a bit of discrimination when these cultures themselves are so profoundly affected? Now, I would like to go into our third contention, which is that broader exposure detrimentally affects the psychological and social stability of the secluded community. Culture we have defined as a system of beliefs, both religious and secular, and beliefs, of course, are what we think and how we think it. People's entire worldviews are made up of the societies in which they live in, and in a secluded religious community, we can be fairly certain that their worldview is predicated on different beliefs and different schemas, systems of belief, than ours. The possibility of causing these people severe psychological and emotional distress through their exposure to the world is one that we absolutely cannot discount. Take, for example, another tribe in the Amazon, which was recently discovered to have no concept of time. When they were introduced to the concept of time, their culture effectively fell apart. Do we feel that this that this price is worth paying for exposing these people to new systems of ideas, new systems of thought, when their entire worldview can be negatively affected by this. Furthermore, we must consider that secluded religious communities are very tight-knit. The loss of a member, even temporarily, will disrupt the social fabric and perhaps the fabric of the community at large, especially if the change is permanent. This is why the House continues to firmly believe that secluded religious communities should not require their members to spend time in broader society. Thank you.
Time.
Ladies and gentlemen, who are these secluded religious communities? Well, you don't have to think about that because we told you and they agreed. Secluded religious communities are those religious communities that are isolated, that do not allow for contact with other groups and broader society. Now, the proposition in their first and second speeches told you that it's only a minority of religious groups that do this. We agree, it is a minority, but the minority is secluded. And the motion is talking about secluded religious communities. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, when we're looking at this debate as a whole, we're talking about those communities whose members do not have exposure to broader society. They are brought up in a secluded religious community. That community has its own ideals. These ideals, we are not judges of them. We do not say that these ideas are good or bad, and I'll get to why we don't in a minute. But we do feel that these religious communities, because they are secluded, do not give an opportunity for other people, for people in those communities to learn about broader society.
Point, please.
Yes.
Hey, did your first speaker not use extensively the example of the Amish, which in fact does permit outside contact?
Thank you. So we're not, exactly, and since the Amish already fulfill what the proposition is trying to say, we are using them as a model, not someone we are trying to fix. The Amish with Rumspringa are already requiring 1 year outside of the Amish community. So we don't think that the Amish even have a problem in this motion today. So the proposition believes that the opposition's point falls. Basically, the point of this, ladies and gentlemen, is that we have to keep in mind that secluded religious communities do not have exposure to the outside world. And the entire premise of the proposition's case is that we want to guarantee that they have some exposure so we can permit the freedom of opportunity and the freedom of choice, which is part of our yardstick. As the third speaker of the proposition, I will systematically go through the opposition's case and tell you why their contentions are false. And then I will go back to the proposition's case and tell you why it is superior. Now, all three of the opposition's contentions revolved around culture. The first contention was about cultural imperialism, and the second speaker stated that the proposition is insinuating that our culture is better than theirs. We want to make sure that you come to our culture. That's what the opposition is making the proposition seem like, but ladies and gentlemen, we never said that. When the proposition said that secluded religious communities should make their members spend time in outer society, we said that because at least it exposes them. We do not want all members of secluded religious communities to come to us because we forced them. We just want to make sure that they are making their conscious decision, that they are making the conscious decision to be in that religious community because we value choice. And we understand and acknowledge that there is potential for those secluded religious communities, as we have agreed upon in our definition, for them to suppress these opportunities because they simply, by definition, don't allow their members to have access to broader society. And that is why we do not believe that our culture is better than theirs. That's simple words that the opposition is putting in the proposition's mouth. And what we really want to promote is choice. Yes?
If the proposition continues to extol the values of free choice, would the proposition not agree that it would be better to have secluded religious communities allow their members the option of going to society instead of requiring them?
The opposition has brought up this point before, but as we've told you, even if they allow their members to do so, but they don't mandate it, there's invariably some sort of social stigma against it because they are secluded in the first place. First of all, if they allowed their members to go into broader society, they wouldn't be secluded religious communities in the first place. So that's on the premise it's false. But even if we add this to the definition post-hand, there's still a social stigma because these secluded religious communities are under the mindset that they don't want to be affected by outside influence. So, if a member knows that his community is not really in favor of outside influence, he would be less inclined to go out and experience that outside culture for himself because he knows that there's some sort of stigma against outside culture. It's easy for the opposition to just say, oh, we give them the choice. But when you think about it, and when you really get into the mind of that member of the religious community, you know that if there is a stigma, if there is some sort of negative attitude toward the outside community, which is why they're secluded, then this would actually not really happen. But if we mandate it, if religious communities themselves mandate it, there will be no stigma because everyone has to do it. They'll know by the time you turn 18, you will have to spend 1 year outside. So they will be forced to take this opportunity and go see it. And as we stated in our case multiple times, either what can happen is that they'll enjoy the broader society, so they can stay there, that's fine, or they can realize that they really do want to stay in the secluded religious community, they can come back, that's fine, and they're all the more the better person because of it. Moving on to their second intention, which is about irreversible changes that our policy comes through, which is also about culture. They stated that if we let these people get exposed to other ideas, it'll bring in new things, it'll bring in new technologies. But does that mean, what is the opposition really implying here, is that we do not want the religious communities to have that opportunity to benefit because it's not our place, as they say it is? Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, the agent of this resolution is the religious communities themselves. The government is not doing anything in this resolution, so the opposition should keep that in mind. But even if it's an outside force, we are not, these irreversible changes, as we've told you, we are not against them. The opposition has stated there should be no irreversible changes because we have to respect their culture. But when we asked them what's so important about culture, they said, it's obvious. Everyone here can agree that culture is very important. But what the proposition thinks is important about culture is that there are benefits to the people. But what benefits? But there are no benefits to the people if they are not being given the choice to experience a new kind of lifestyle. What the opposition has failed to do to tell us today, ladies and gentlemen, and all three of their contentions revolve around this fact, is why preserving culture is so important. Are they just preserving culture for the sake of preserving culture? If they really value it so much, and they value diversity so much, then they should have clearly told us why diversity is so important and why we cannot even touch or even try to give these people an opportunity to change their lifestyles. Now, their final contention was about psychology, and they said this completely that we cannot change people's worldviews. And if we expose them to broader society, somehow, invariably, their worldview will be changed. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, this is not true, and that's an assumption. Maybe these people will just come back with the exact same mindset they had before. But even if their worldview is changed, why is that so bad? The proposition has told you that it's not so bad. Because if that's what the people want, that's what the people should have. We shouldn't be allowing these religious communities, the heads of these secluded religious communities, to be suppressing their members from actually gaining this opportunity. We're not saying that all religious communities will do this, but some might. The only way we can guarantee that this won't happen is if we make them require everyone to come and spend time outside. Their whole thing is they've given a contradiction in their case. Firstly, they're telling us that religious communities don't like broader society, and that's why we shouldn't make them go. But secondly, they said that if religious communities go, they'll come back and their lifestyles will change. Well, they'll only change, ladies and gentlemen, if they actually liked what they saw. And if they liked what they saw, then then actually the proposition is in no place to make sure that they live how they used to live. We take art class in school even if we're not interested in art, because we might be interested in art, not because the school wants to make sure we turn into an artist. The school has a duty to make sure we're exposed. Religious communities have a duty to their members to make sure they have opportunities. Thank you.
Time.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As the third speaker for the oppositionist team, I'd like to take this time to rebut some of the arguments presented thus far in this debate, as well as try and boil down some of the key points to present to you why there are some blatant contradictions in the argument that the proposition has presented thus far. Now, First, I'd like to address the raging question at hand that the third speaker has presented to us as to why preserving cultures is important. Now, we apologize as the opposition for making it seem as if this was self-explanatory, that preserving cultures is something that we must do. But if they really want an answer, here it is. We, the opposition, feel that preserving cultures is important because by changing them, by adding our own views upon them, we permanently destroy what this culture once was, implying that these cultures don't necessarily learn from us. They don't necessarily synthesize what we teach them with their own cultures, but not right now, 1 second. But rather, they give up their own ideals for what is presented to them. Now, this isn't okay. At the same time, if they do not necessarily like the ideas that we present them, the culture that they once had still falls due to the change and exposure they have been given to, because it is such a massive change. A perfect example of this is depicted in the film, The Gods Must Be Crazy. Now, I don't know if any of you have seen this film, but in the film, we have an African tribe of bush people where a simple can of Coca-Cola, a simple bottle of Coca-Cola is dropped into the tribe. Now, the tribe uses this can, this simple can that we in modern or broader society would throw away as trash, for a multi-use tool, something that they did not have before. But what happens is that even though this tribe may have liked the technology that we have so kindly gifted to them, it created conflict. Everyone in the society wanted to use the technology. Everyone wanted control of it. And the leadership in the society fell apart. That is why in the film, the technology, the simple can of Coke, was taken away from the Bush tribe. Now, I'd like to take some time to go into the specific key points that the proposition has presented thus far. Now, the first speaker presented this idea of their whole life living in a room, and how living in this room, these people have limited opportunities, and because they're within this small, isolated space, tensions can grow between them and broader society, as well as tensions within themselves. Now, firstly, I'd like to question what threat could pose actual tension between broader society and a small, isolated, secluded religious community, as well as if there are tensions within them, as the proposition has defined. These societies have their own government. They have their own leadership to combat these tensions. That is why they handle themselves. That is why they're self-sustaining. Now, the reason the opposition can so easily claim that these people are not exposed to what the world around them really is, and they should be given the opportunity to do so, is because by looking from a higher place, it seems as if these people are beneath us. However, we as the opposition would like to claim that this is not the case. The reason we are so comfortable with the risk of destroying these communities as a whole is because our culture would not suffer at all. We hold no risk in this case. However, these people, these societies, these individuals risk their homes, their lives, their past, their present, and their future. They next present the idea. Oh, please.
However, does the opposition recognize that a community is a group of individuals? And if each individual is presented with new opportunities and new technology that will improve their own lives, this community, which is made up of these individuals, will inevitably be better off?
I'd like to focus on the word inevitably, where we feel that the proposition is incorrect. Inevitably is too strong a word. Yes, it is possible that the exposure can actually improve the society. A perfect case of this, as you presented, is the Amish people, which I will address later. However, we run the risk of destroying the society as a whole, which brings me to the next point that we, the opposition, feel that this debate has hinged on, the word require. Require is a very important word to pay close attention to in this debate, because as the opposition has presented themselves, they have claimed that free choice and free will is absolutely necessary. However, we require them to do this. They don't have a choice about that. Even if in a society such as the Amish, one second please. Even if in a society as the Amish people, which the proposition is presented as their perfect model, allows their people to do so, the social stigma will stop them. So we must make it so that they are required to do so. implying that even in a society where they are given the choice, where they are given the free will that the proposition so strongly pushes forward, we have to force them to do it. Now that is a contradiction that we feel that this entire debate hinges on. As I said before, they always claim to give these people choice, but we as the opposition would like to imply that who said we are giving them more opportunities? Who is to say that our society is better than theirs? That is the definition of cultural imperialism.
Point, sir.
Oh, please.
But we are not saying that our society is better. We are saying that it might have something to teach them, just like they might have something to teach us, right?
Okay. Now, firstly, I'd like to address the idea that so far in the opposition, while you may claim that you are not forcing them, while you may claim that you are not acting on cultural imperialism, we feel that the points that are put forward thus far, such as the idea of requiring them to do so, absolutely contradict this point. As well as, if we have something to learn from them, if we have something to gain from this society, how is forcing them to teach it to us, forcing them and risking their own society okay? So what the proposition is implying with this idea is that for our own gain, we must access these societies. Now, I'd like to allude this, one second please. I'd like to allude this to Europe going into Africa and creating slaves. The same idea applies. Do you have a question?
But does the opposition not recognize that there are certain factors that are present in these religious communities that actually impose a burden and prevent free choice to be exercised that would be exercised if these individuals were given this year to explore the world?
Okay. Now, let's take the example that the proposition has just put forward. The idea that these people will not be allowed because of their social stigmas or their current governmental system within the secluded society. However, again, it brings us to the idea of require. Why do we force them? As the question has been posed, what is the importance of preserving culture? We've answered that. The question I pose is that why must we give them these opportunities? What is the reason to really provide them with this when we run the risk of destroying their entire society? Now, the next point that they claim is that they claim the people in the community should unanimously decide to send people into society. Oh. But we feel that this would be very, very powerful if they actually chose to do so. We should not require them to do so. Thank you.
You have 15 seconds remaining. Time.
Thank you. As a reply speaker for the opposition, I'm going to do my best to boil down this debate into a key argument that we can hopefully agree on. So the proposition, through their own wording, through their own actions, through their own demeanor, have typified the issue with this debate. They have taken on the burden of showing other cultures the problems inherently with them. They have used phrases like our duty. They have used phrases like the inherent flaws in these secluded communities. They have used phrases like the problems in these communities. And this is exactly the type of thing that we need to prevent. We cannot allow this sort of cultural imperialism to permeate through the world. Now, they have argued that there is no need to respect other cultures, but we would invite them to look back towards history. As we have seen time and time again, the disrespect for a culture, for the diversity of culture in the world, has shown that history has shown that a disrespect for culture in the world results in very negative effects for the people. Let us remember the British occupation of India. Let us remember the British occupation of the United States. Let us remember the British occupation of Australia. In each of these cases, the secluded communities within those areas put down the indigenous peoples and made them second-class citizens. It is for this reason that we must remember history in our considerations of culture. It is for this reason that we must not ignore the importance of cultural diversity. Because in order for us to respect culture, this is a way for us to also to respect people. To prevent these sorts of atrocities from happening again, we must also understand that there is a fundamental respect for culture in our current lives. So let's also revisit the idea of choice. The proposition has claimed that they are simply granting the freedom of choice to members of that community, but we have shown that this simply is not the case. First off, the simple act of making contact to these communities changes the community as it were already. Giving them the choice between broader society as a whole or the community as it was after contact is not a choice that they would like to make. The choice that we would present is a choice between a broader society as a whole and the community as it was before contact. But since this is clearly impossible, we cannot allow this choice to be made. This choice, in fact, is robbed from the people, and that is vital in this debate. Additionally, the resolution itself uses the word require, another term that removes the freedom of choice from the individual, and we also believe that this is key in this debate. They have claimed that they are giving choice. That is not the case. They are taking it away. So the requirement to experience foreign culture can only result in detrimental effects, because by allowing communities to instead develop independently, free of outside interference, we allow them a rich culture, a rich history of their own. But instead of us coming in there and asking them to please experience the culture of other people, by doing this instead, what we find is that we influence their history. We prevent them from developing it on their own means. So to recap, it is not our position to identify problems in a secluded community. It is not our place to tell them how to solve the problems or even to identify the problems within themselves. That is only theirs. The proposition has instead made blanket statements without factual basis. With the burden of proof, the proposition has failed to show us a single instance of successful implementation of their policy. In fact, the proposition has failed to prove any reason why these cultures ought to be dismantled at all, instead placing that burden on the proposition. So removing cultural diversity is a problem, and the opposition with the burden of this clash has shown that replacing their cultures with our civilized culture, in fact, is a detrimental effect. And this is why we believe the resolution ought to be struck down. So regardless, the opposition has fulfilled their burden. We have filled the burden of clash, and we have presented a reasonable and effective argument as to why these cultures should not be exposed to the outside world. Again, to preserve these cultures, to preserve the freedom of choice within these communities, and to preserve the ideas that have rooted these communities within their homes for so long is vital to this debate. This is detrimental. Any other attempt to do so is detrimental to the quality of life experienced by these people in these communities. And it is not our place to tell them how to live their lives or in what extent we should interfere with their affairs. Thank you.
Time.
Ladies and gentlemen, why do we value a medication? Well, because a medication has a benefit for the people. But if it is found that this medication has negative effects for the people, if it's a medication that the people choose not to take, do we still value the sale of this medication? We do not. Likewise, if culture is one that is not liked by the members of it, culture is one that actually suppresses and hinders the advancement of the people, do we still value that culture? The proposition has been saying for the whole time, we do not value this culture. And the opposition keeps telling us that we should value cultural preservation. Because if we do not value cultural preservation, we'll have fewer and fewer cultures in society. But they still have never told us why culture is so important. Why culture is so important that we can forsake people, the choice for people to either live in that culture or to live in modern society. Now, as a reply speaker, I feel that there are three central questions that have already arisen in the debate so far. Firstly, do we still promote free choice by requiring something? Secondly, would secluded religious communities still allow their members to easily transfer in and out in the status quo right now? And thirdly, is cultural preservation more important than advancement? Firstly, and most importantly, can we still promote free choice by requiring something? Yes, because here's the thing. Right now, in the status quo, secluded religious communities do not allow the individuals to leave the society. And in fact, this is something that the opposition team agreed in the definition proposed by the first opposition speaker. So, there's no free choice that exists in the status quo. So we need to guarantee that free choice is given to all these people. How do we guarantee that free choice is given to all these people? Well, we have to require the religious communities to make it a principle of theirs that they will allow individuals to go outside their boundaries and to spend time in the broader society. That's how we can guarantee free choice will always be present, by requiring these religious communities to make this exposure to broader society one of their central principles. Now, secondly, in the status quo, do secluded religious communities allow already their members to go in and out? And we, as propositions, stand firm and say that no, in the status quo, this choice is not present. That's why we have to enforce this policy and mandate that these religious communities allow this advancement to be made. And there are two reasons. Firstly, because these are secluded religious communities. So by definition, they actively involve themselves in isolating themselves from Bardiya society, so they will not allow the individuals to enter Bardiya society. And this is something that was conceded by the opposition, and even though later they said that these religious communities in fact do allow for this choice, because they initially said in their first opposition speaker, they defined a secluded religious community as one that isolates themselves. It's a moving target, and we as a proposition have to go with our definition. So secluded religious communities prohibit any sort of transfer between inside the community and outside the community. Therefore, we need a policy that mandates and changes status quo, because in the status quo, these opportunities are limited. Now, my last central question, is cultural preservation more important than advancement? We, as a proposition, feel and we actually know that a culture is ultimately composed of multiple individuals. And it is the individuals that matter, because the individuals have to work towards their self-betterment. So we ask you this question, should we really value cultural preservation? Something we don't even know if it is valuable, because oppositions never told us why culture is valuable. Should we value this at the expense of self-advancement? And we as a proposition stand for the betterment of society as a whole and the betterment for the individuals. So even if a culture is lost because individuals choose to assimilate to different principles, if these principles are done because these people feel it's for their self-betterment, we still stand by it. Now, the policy of the proposition, why is so good? Why is it so good? Because by mandating that each individual spends at least 1 year outside of Bardiya society, we remove all these tensions present in society. There's no social stigma, because Bardiya society is able to fully integrate and understand the workings of the religious community, and the religious community itself is more cognizant of the happenings outside, and probably more opportunities given to these people, because these religious communities are forced to allow this sort of advancement given to the people. So ladies and gentlemen, it is time that the person in the room steps outside and makes the conscious decision to either come back or come back with different principles. It's time for that person to